In light of what's been going on in our nation and in our community over the past really years, but specifically since the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, we wanted to have a larger conversation about race relations and specifically about race relations as it pertains to the police department. And Sheriff Troy Berry has graciously agreed to join us for this conversation. So over the next quite a long conversation, we're gonna unpack almost all of the questions that were sent to us by folks through our social media platforms. We announced we were going to do this. You sent us questions. We've printed them out, and now we're going to ask them to the sheriff. So stay with us and watch what's going on. All right, well, I've got a question that is directed right at you. It actually starts with Mr. Berry, comma, and I'm just going to read it exactly the way it was given to us. Why have you not taken a public stance against the profiling and murder of black men and women? What are you doing about your own officers with numerous complaints? So the second half of that sentence we've dealt with, we've talked about, but the first half of the sentence is directed right at you, and I'll just let you take it.
Thank you, Pastor. Yeah. I have come out publicly and made a statement in reference to the incident involving Mr. George Floyd. Mm-hmm. I basically said this in our press release that was released, actually was probably May 31st, mm-hmm. that the death of Mr. Floyd was a tragedy. Mm-hmm. And the capture of that particular, him passing away on video, is going to be etched in the memory of all of us.
Right.
And it's a very tragic situation. And I said I do not condone anything that I saw on that video, personally or professionally. Mm-hmm. But at the same breath, I said that we can't allow the actions of a few people mm-hmm. Diminish the wonderful work that law enforcement does each and every day, right. Through bravery, through their courage, through their commitment in our community. So I've said that is a tragic situation. I gave my condolences to the family, and I don't condone what, professionally or personally, what I've saw in the video.
And the issue of profiling, racial profiling, I assume that the county has dealt with that long since.
Well, or
at least attempted to.
Our officers, specifically, that anytime that they complete a traffic stop, we have traffic stop data that they have to put in our computer system, so we know who they're stopping, the race of the person they're stopping, the reason why they're stopping, if they search the vehicle. Mm-hmm. All of that information is put into our blue team. So not only we have the video recording, now we have the data from the traffic stop itself, or if someone issued a ticket, a warning, or a repair order, but we have the officer's information in reference to the race of the person, the reason of the stop, and or any unusual events that happen. So we're able to track. So to that particular person, if you have those particular issues, please contact the sheriff's office and let us know what's going on so we can research that particular information. Okay. But the data that we have does not suggest that there's a racial profiling issues in the Charles County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. All right. Being an officer is a stressful job. Have you and your leaders considered, or would you consider, doing psychological testing and counseling to evaluate their mental health? We asked this earlier. I work with behavioral scientists and mental health instructors, and I believe for an officer to kill an unarmed black man is rooted in learned hatred, but also in mental instability. Anything you want to add there? Because we have talked about the psychological evaluations and the way that you would put that in place.
Just to speak specifically to that question, we do have processes in place to address not just deaths involving officers, just traumatic situations in place. We have debriefings, as I said previously. We have a mechanism for them to come together, talk about those specific issues with a mental health professional. And if an officer is having some issues, we have mechanism to have them to go through what is called fitness for duty test to kind of evaluate those particular issues that may come to light through a mental health professional evaluation.
Okay. This question came in. When an officer pulls a black person or a black male in specific over, is there a different protocol? I'm asking, the writer says, I'm asking because there are a lot of cases, hundreds if not thousands of cases, where traffic stops resulted in killing and usually unarmed. Is there a different protocol?
Normally the protocol is this. The individual is stopped. Officer makes an approach to the car. The person's with the windows down, the officer is talking to the person inside the vehicle. They normally give the greeting of the day. They state who they are and the reason why they stopped them, and also ask for a license or registration. But what I can encourage anybody that's on a traffic stop is this. Sometimes people are trying to be helpful to a fault. As I said on a previous segment, is that one of the most dangerous times for law enforcement is on a traffic stop. When you are a law enforcement officer and you're looking through someone's rearview mirror, whether that's day or at nighttime, it's important that that person keep their hands on the steering wheel and do not make any movement. But sometimes people are such a rush to be helpful, they're going to the going to their wallet, going to a purse to get the ID, and all the officer see is movement. They're going to the glove compartment. We don't know if it's contraband in there. We don't know if it's a weapon in there.
Right.
So what I suggest people to do on traffic stops is put your window down, turn your interior light on, put your hands on the steering wheel, and wait to follow the instructions of the officer.
Okay.
And I think that shows the officer that I'm doing everything. I'm not a threat to you or anything like that. And it helps with the traffic stop process. And this is information that I share with loved ones, my own family members.
Right.
That is critically important that you do these kind of things to make sure that you lessen the anxiety of the officer when they have these type of encounters during the traffic stop.
Good. Okay. All right. So this answer is there's not a separate protocol.
No, there is not a separate protocol.
Good. So let's talk just a minute. There's some broad questions that came up, but maybe we can have a little bit of conversation about it. The broad question, this one is huge, and we're not going to solve it today, but maybe we can have a thought about it, which is how do we stop racism? Now, that's a huge question. So do you have thoughts on that?
It's interesting that you say that, Pastor. I can only go back to the way I was taught. I was one of 8 children. I was the baby of 8 children. And when you start talking about some of those particular social ills that we have, particular racism, I have to just harken back to what my mom taught me. Treat people like you want to be treated.
Right.
It sounds very elementary,
Right.
but sometimes it's very difficult for some people to do that. And that's how I tried to live my life. Equally, that's how I try to train my staff members.
Right.
Is that think about that person that you're on the traffic stop is your wife, is your husband, is your daughter, is your son. Think about when you're going to the domestic, that how would you want an officer treat a loved one of yours?
Right.
So I try to, through our training, personalize these encounters with law enforcement, because we want to make sure that if we do that in that method, we hope our officers will use that thought process and how they go about dealing with the citizens in the community. We have to understand this. Law enforcement has a difficult job.
Yes.
And we have to understand this, that the community and law enforcement are not going anywhere. So the question is, how do we begin to coexist? And some of the suggestions that I've laid out through some of these sessions, if in Charles County, if officers are not doing what they're supposed to do, I'm suggesting that you file a formal complaint and allow the process to work, because I don't want any of your viewers to suffer in silence.
Right.
And I think we all have a responsibility. And that is that is just a simple way I can say it. Treat people like you want to be treated. But I think we also have to examine our own selves, that we all have certain biases. We all have certain preferences. And sometimes we as people will gravitate towards our own comfort zones. Have you tried to understand a different culture?
Right.
Have you ever tried to visit another neighborhood? Have you ever tried to interact with somebody that may be not on the same socioeconomic platform that you are? I think once we begin to understand that we all have different come from different backgrounds, we all have different experience, then we become more tolerant of one another.
One of the things I actually love about Charles County, and I'm from North Carolina, but one of the things I love about Charles County is the diversity of the county and the fact that here at New Life Church, we can have a diverse church.
Absolutely.
And I'll often say to our congregation, this is a major part of the answer, us worshiping together, because it's awfully difficult to hate someone that you worship alongside.
Exactly.
Because you know God made both of you.
That's right.
And so I really believe that's part of the answer. If you are constantly in communities where everybody around you looks just like you, you're going to get trapped in some, I'll use an old preacher phrase, some pretty stinking thinking, so, but at any rate, that's good. Let's be honest. This next question said, let's be honest. Let's put it out there. People are crazy. Like many mayors in hot zones are saying, the people involved in violent protests are not protesting for solutions, they're seeking revenge. What can you offer as a respectable black sheriff to stem the tide of revenge and change the mentality of the black community to partner towards written legal change and solutions? Are there think tanks out there that they can join to help write up bill solutions to their representatives, community partnering with CCSO, et cetera? In other words, this will take a change in law and policy in places, and I'm not smart enough to know where those places are. Are there groups that are helping, integrated groups that are helping to figure this out?
Well, I think that's a wonderful way to go about it and have some conversation. How can we do it through the legislative process? But what my concern is that we begin to talk to each other and not at each other.
Right.
And sometimes we can produce legislation and don't get the desired result.
You can't legislate evil or hatred out of a heart.
Pretty much. Mm-hmm. And that's my concern. I think that we have to definitely work with legislatures and make sure that we as agencies are very transparent about how we go about doing what we do in our communities and everything. But it's something I've just received a number of emails over the weekend that there's some state legislators and also working with the Maryland Sheriff's Association, which I'm a part of, and the Maryland Chiefs Association, and there are going to be some conversations over the summer of how we can go about working through the legislative process to create laws and processes that will definitely mitigate these particular issues from happening.
Okay, good. Side question from me, this is not on the list. Is there a particular law or practice in the state of Maryland that you think ought to change, that you'd be willing to talk about?
I want to harken back to a conversation that we had on a previous session, is that I would encourage the local body of county commissioners to start having a dialogue about the Board of Public Safety here in Charles County. I think once you get outside of the county, things become more and more difficult to legislate because you have to get a consensus from all across the state. So I would suggest, why don't we start working on local legislation to create that transparency and that oversight people would like to have, and then we create a process of how we can go about getting that done.
That's awesome. Okay. Here's another one. Lord willing, I will never find myself in a situation like the individual who recorded the death of Mr. Floyd on their cell phone as he was being murdered. However, if I do someday find myself the witness of an officer using excessive force or behavior in a way that seems out of line, what should I do? Is it safe and lawful for me to try to intervene, to verbally try to de-escalate the situation, to physically step in seeking to protect the citizen? Should I call 911 and will that make a difference? Or is my only safe recourse to pull out my camera to record so that at least I'll have evidence if this incident of abuse results in yet another life lost?
I would suggest, as I would suggest previously to the young lady in reference to the traffic stop,
Right.
Observe from a safe distance. If you feel comfortable, record the incident and report that incident to the authorities. You don't necessarily have to report it to the agency involved. You can report it to the state police. You can report it to another federal organization that can kind of look at it. But those are your alternatives. I would not suggest anyone that would inject themselves physically into an encounter where a law enforcement officer is engaging with someone. I just don't think that is a safe route to take. I think if you observe at a safe distance, be a good witness, and if you're in a position to record the event, record the event.
Okay. These next two questions kind of go together, and let's put them together. I'm going to read one of them because it will kind of cover the other. Why do we as Black people feel we have to take extra precaution to extreme measures when being pulled over? We know that it's a chance that we might not make it out alive just from that one traffic stop, especially seeing the vast differences in situations, how a white person is handled versus a Black person. We are dealt with much more aggression and force than our white or other race counterparts. What would you say to that?
I can understand that person's emotion in reference to a traffic stop. I've been pulled over prior to being a police officer and have been pulled over since being a police officer. And it's a very unnerving experience to have a law enforcement officer behind you. But I think you need to think the process through. Like I suggest, put down the window, cut on the interior lights, and put your hands on the steering wheel. And be very compliant of the instructions of the officer. I think that it empowers you if you have an initial game plan, if you're being stopped by an officer. And 99.99% of the encounters on the traffic stop are being recorded by officers. I can't imagine too many law enforcement vehicles at this juncture where we are in 2020 that do not have audio and video in their police vehicles.
So all of your Charles County vehicles have them?
All of our marked vehicles have them in them, and some of our unmarked. If we don't put those cameras in our detective vehicles because they don't perform traffic stops.
Gotcha. Okay.
So those vehicles that are more likely to have traffic stop encounters, like our patrol officers, our traffic safety officers, our school resource officers, all the marked vehicles and the unmarked vehicles officers that are going to be performing traffic stops, that they have them in there.
Okay. Would you be open to a transparent monthly community meeting? This would be run probably by the group you'd like to see reinvigorated.
Absolutely. I have no problem being out and engaging the community and answering some questions.
There is one here that says there needs to be an organization under the Department of Justice branch that investigates all police-related matters, external from internal affairs or police organizations. And they ask what currently exists and how can that change happen? And you answered the question. Every incident like this, as I remember the answer, goes to the state level, and the state level looks at this. And I forget the actual officer that you said looks at this at the state level if there is an incident of police violence.
Now in Charles County, we do our own investigations of alleged acts of alleged misconduct.
Right. Okay.
Now, state's attorneys.
Right.
Our local state's attorney here in Charles County.
Okay.
We review any acts of any allegations of criminal. That's all done in Charles County.
But that local state's attorney works for the state, not the county?
It's an elected official.
Oh, okay.
A state
Gotcha.
is elected state official who is here in Charles County.
Okay, got
Yes,
it.
sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
so that's how that works.
Now, let me say this. Now, it depends on what state you're in. I just want to kind of give, because some people have different experiences. If you go to I'm pretty sure it's North Carolina or South Carolina, they have state bureaus that look at different use of force situations from a state perspective. We do not have that in Maryland. And if that's something that the state delegation is looking for, they have state entities that look at all use of force incidents in their state, and it's all under one auspice.
Okay.
They do that.
All right. Okay. That answers all those. If you'll stay, I keep thinking we can wrap this up in the next one, but if you're willing to do one more, I have those.
Okay.
You
That's
okay?
no problem.
All right, let's do one more.
All right.
All right.